Welcome to Convergence.fm. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanand.
Oh, you can only manage something if you can measure it. Well, I don't buy that. I don't think that's true at all. More importantly, a measurement reveals what you revere. And I don't revere billable hours, and neither do the customers.
On the show, we explore how purpose-driven leaders align their culture, operations, and experimentation to de-risk the decisions that really matter and lead AI-enabled businesses with clarity. Convergence.fm. Transform from the inside out. You're probably using AI in your business today in some capacity. And you might be seeing some outcomes about how output's better, you're doing it faster, maybe for cheaper, but your customer contracts don't really help you realize a lot of those savings and seeing them into churning into more margin. And with something so monumental of a shift like AI in terms of how work is getting done, you might be due for thinking about changing your business model. If you are, this episode's gonna be awesome. Welcome back to Convergence.fm. This is an episode and conversation I've been really looking forward to for a while. My guest is Ron Baker. He's a co-founder of Threshold and also the founder of the VeraSage Institute. Now, he spent decades challenging how professional services firms work and how businesses think about value, pricing, and transformation. And as much as he started his career at KPMG, he later went to pioneer value pricing. He's written 8 books, including the one that I read, Time's Up. And his work has influenced firms across accounting, law, consulting, and other professional services, including software development around the world. But the reason I wanted to have Ron on the show is not an accounting conversation, don't worry. It's about that business model change that I think AI is really going to bring about. And it's giving me a lot of ideas how to think differently about serving our customers. A lot of CEOs today, like yourself, are exploring AI and you're bringing your teams along. You're experimenting with new tools, with automations, with data systems. Maybe you've got a MacBook Mini running OpenClaw. But what often gets missed is not just about efficiency. It's how it can really change the economics of how the business value is created in your industry. And I really like this conversation because Ron's been thinking about this shift for decades, well before AI. He talks about something he calls the transformation economy, something I'd love to get into more with him here, where companies should stop focusing on selling products or services and really start thinking about what enabling measurable change you're driving for your customers. On the episode, we explore why most firms still organize themselves around internal activity rather than customer outcomes, why customer profit is one of the most overlooked ideas in business, and how AI might accelerate a shift towards outcome-based pricing and these new business models. We also get into some of the example from industries that may not seem as related at first. Things like concierge medicine and doctors, Fender guitars, and even Lego subscriptions. But each of them reveals something about how companies move from selling a product to actually enabling a transformation for their customers. One quick note, though, before we get started. Unfortunately, we ran into a little bit of a technical issue during the recording, and my video feed cuts out a little bit of the way through. So you're mostly going to be seeing Ron on the screen from that point on and a photo placeholder of myself, which honestly is probably fine since he is way more interesting than I am. With that being said, please enjoy this conversation with Ron Baker from Threshold on Convergence.fm. Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. Hey, Ron. I've been so excited to have you on here, in part because I've loved reading your book, Time's Up. In other part because, coincidentally, I think you were at KPMG. My first, between freshman and sophomore year, my internship was at KPMG, and wow. I was assigned to do internal audit at a bank. And this is while I was an engineering student, and in part because of nepotism, my uncle got me this internship. And the biggest thing probably that I took away was that I wanted nothing to do with accounting or audit. And you have me listening to an accounting podcast now and excited to listen to it. So maybe you don't call it an accounting podcast, but so I've just been really jazzed and looking forward to this date and our recording. And speaking of that, something that I'd love to know is in terms of advice for business owners out there. You work with a lot of them. What's a way that we could better make use of the value that their accounting folks can bring compared to how most of us might be doing it today?
Now, this is going to be a broad generalization, but most accounting firms aren't really that good at forward thinking. We're kind of historians with lousy memories, right? We look backwards. I mean, you'll appreciate this doing internal auditing as an intern. The joke about auditors is they come in after the war and they bayonet the wounded.
Yep.
Right. And so I wouldn't suggest you go to accountants for like business model innovation or innovation at all, unless, and here's the exception, unless that firm has transformed itself. If it's gone through a transformation, then yes, I do think it's got valuable input to their customers about what it takes to transform a business model. But let's face it, the billable hour that most professionals use, even though it's shrunk in the last 30 or so years, it's still predominant, and it's a 100-year-old model. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. And so if they can't get themselves out of that, then how could they possibly help companies with AI or SaaS or anything else?
Got it. So before we can even ask them the question, we got to ask ourselves if this is the firm. And I assume, the no points answer is if they're charging us hourly, they probably haven't transformed themselves.
Absolutely.
What would your checks be about, how do I know if I might be talking to the right firm or not?
I would ask them two questions. One, do you bill hourly? And two, do you track time internally? If they track time internally, they are still in a fee-for-service labor theory of value model that is completely obsolete in today's world. I mean, it was obsolete when it came in 100 years ago, but it's even more obsolete today. The world has changed and they haven't moved on yet.
We, at Integral, we would often be hired to develop software products. It could be mobile apps, things in the cloud, AI. And when we did product discovery, oftentimes we'd realize that, hey, if you're going to create this new leverage from technology, there's actually a way to disrupt the business model of what you're thinking here. And we'd get our wrist slapped when we started to get close to business model or fees or billing or pricing, because my hunch is that oftentimes the person in the room, and this is with really big companies that were really fragmented, right? The person in the room didn't have the authority to change that.
Right.
And, my hunch is that someone from accounting would have been really valuable to have in the room, because they would be able to tweak the knobs and levers differently than maybe this business owner did, or maybe we could kind of force a discussion like that. I'm curious if you've seen these conversations go well, or when someone's at the cusp of changing their business models, what are some of the elements that you've seen that kind of really help foster that?
If I would have had a consultant help us when we moved to fixed pricing in 1989, I wouldn't have made all the mistakes that we made. It wouldn't have been as painful. It probably wouldn't have taken as long. I mean, we were really committed to it, and we stuck with it, even though it was painful. But the thing about it was we were committed to it. We knew this was the way, and the only way I knew that is because the customers loved it. And we started getting customers just because we were a fixed price firm.
Having read your book, it's obvious that it was the right move. I imagine for yourself and maybe anyone else on leadership, during the early days of having the faith to take the leap, things would have been a little bit messy. And there's a lot of business owners that I work with now who are trying to incorporate AI and go beyond kind of the installing Copilot and saying we're doing AI transformation, right?
Right.
So, share a little bit of the war stories from the early days that might be helpful for us to kind of take the leaps ourselves.
You're right about how hard it was. And my logic was, I'm going to start with my current customers because They know me. We have a relationship. We've built up trust. So my first value conversation took place on the 19th hole of a golf course. And I'm sitting there with a business owner who I truly respect. He was sort of a mentor. This guy was a really good pricer in his line of work. And I said, listen, I know you don't like the way we price. I know you know, we send you bills that are completely unknowable, unpredictable. You can't budget for it. Worse, we send you the bill at the time of year when you're broke. And who knows your cash flow better than I do? How stupid is that? And I said, I want to put you on a fixed price. And I want to bundle in everything. I just want to say, this is what we're going to do. You can call me. You can meet with me anytime, anywhere, any length. No clock running in the background. He flipped. He loved it. He said, it's about time, Baker. It's about time. And as I had more and more of those conversations, now these are my best customers I started with. Not necessarily the biggest ones, but the best relationships. They all loved it. I said, how can we not do this? How can we not? How can we sit there and listen to the customer say, it's about time, and yes, even if it costs me more, I'm willing to pay you more as long as you give me certainty in price. And it was kind of like a fixed rate mortgage versus variable. Of course, we're going to take fixed rate and be willing to pay more because of the certainty and the predictability of it. And that was a big lesson for me. But it emboldened us to keep going even through the years. You know, anything worth doing is hard. I mean, I'm sure you know this in your work. Challenges are tough. I mean, you're going to make mistakes. Tiger's going to hit one in the lake. You know, he's not going to throw down his clubs and go, screw this game. You know, he's going to plow through it. And we kind of did that. And we stuck with it. And then it's a skill. Pricing is a skill. The more you do it, the better you get.
And you mentioned something pretty key there around predictability and uncertainty. And essentially, you know, a lens that it took me a while to get to is that there's a lot of value created when you can take on uncertainty on your customer's behalf to bring what's more predictable for them. And I'm curious, you know, from a customer uncertainty standpoint, you de-risked it in the way you just talked about. How about from an operational uncertainty? Were you worried that your folks were going to be billing a lot more than you had priced in? Did you set it up iteratively? How did you de-risk the internals?
Yeah, the internal de-risking was a very interesting process because once we were not charging or pricing based on time, based on inputs, and we're looking more at the outputs and even sometimes the outcomes, then I thought, well, there's no point in tracking time. You know, anytime we measure something in a company, it's fraught with danger and risk and uncertainty because we think that, oh, you can only manage something if you can measure it. Well, I don't buy that. I don't. But more importantly, a measurement reveals what you revere. And I don't revere billable hours, and neither do the customers. We should measure things that matter to the customer. This is why FedEx measures on-time delivery. Wow, what a concept. Because that's how we judge the success of FedEx. Did it drop on my doorstep by 8:30? I know we both know Dr. Paul. That's how I think you and I met, Ashok. And look at what Dr. Paul measures for his patients. Now, sure, he's got his internal financial metrics and all of that, like any SaaS company. But look what he measures. He measures, risk and comorbidities, prevented ER visits, prevented drugs, prevented procedures, prevented hospitalizations, weight goal loss, anxiety, depression, alleviation, those types. He measures things that define the success of the doctor the same way the patient does. That's what we need to do. And what we measure is really critical inside of an organization because you'll get what you measure and you'll get it good and hard, even if it ruins the organization. Just look at Wells Fargo, and their scandal with the opening false accounts because they had a strategy that said, we want to get closer to the customer, but that strategy became a measurement. We want to have 8 accounts per customer. And the strategy took over, the measurement took over the strategy. It's called segregation. And it almost ruined the bank. It's billions of dollars in fines and lawsuits and class action suits just because of the measurement. One of the most expensive measurements in financial history.
And for the audience's benefit, Dr. Paul is a concierge doctor that I'm a very happy subscriber of here. You got to pay a little bit on top of, it doesn't mitigate having insurance, but I can have a very different deductible on my insurance with Blue Cross or whoever, because I know that Dr. Paul and his team are available for most of what I need. And then without having this is my assumption, without having the sort of tentacles of insurance telling Dr. Paul how to run his business, he's been able to transform the customer experience completely. He can do things over text message that other doctors need you to go in person for. He's able to, I go to get my blood work done way more often because he just makes it easy. I go on Calendly, I find a time that's convenient for me in between things. I show up, he's ready. There's no waiting in the waiting room for a ton of time. Him or some of his team is ready for me, and I'm in and out of there in 10 minutes. And that was the biggest pain about getting blood work done. Where, going back to your measurement thing, I knew there were key things I needed to track. And the more I measured it, the more my behavior changed. But the customer experience that my previous doctor had, who was beholden to insurance, really just didn't give me the data feedback as often as my behavior change needed. And you mentioned something earlier around transformation. And in your book, I think you quoted a couple of software as a service or SaaS companies rebranding themselves as transformation as a service companies. And I'm sure there's a few folks listening here that work in a similar space that I used to in digital transformation. It sounds really nice. And in some cases, I'll say we truly did. We were able to change the way that the CEO, the key operators really thought in technology terms, place smaller bets, use data more, really harness the leverage that came out of it. Another time, some of our bigger clients would just want high-paid staff augmentation, and they were happy for us to, call ourselves digital transformation, but there wasn't necessarily a bunch of change we were able to kind of bring forth for them compared to execution. So when you think about transformation, I know this is something you've spent a lot of time on. I'm curious what a self-check might be for business owners listening out there as to whether what they're doing is truly transformative or whether it's just kind of lost in the branding of transformation.
The way I think about transformations is if you think about goods and services, yes, they save us time. I don't mow my own lawn. I don't change my own oil. And goods and services exist outside of us. When we started to move into the experience economy, when we went on, these great vacations or we went to Disney World with the family, experiences are inherently personal, right? They happen inside of us. When a family goes to the Grand Canyon, each person, views it differently, is inspired by different things or has different meanings attached to it. And experiences are revealed over time. But now we're moving into transformations, and transformations are fundamentally individual. You're actually changing people from the inside out, and you're sustaining it through time. There's usually some type of from to statement. I want to go from being, unfit to physically fit, or from smoker to non-smoker, whatever it might be, but you're changing the person. And therefore, in the transformation economy, the customer's the product. And that's a bigger thing than a digital transformation or, say, moving from desktop to the cloud or something like that. That's all important, but we're talking about changing individuals. Even if they work in a business and you're working on the business, you're still changing the individuals within that business. And that's what's so exciting about the transformation economy, because everybody's got aspirations. The whole world has aspirations, and they fall usually in 4 different spheres. They want to be healthier, wealthier, wiser, and live with meaning. And therefore, these aspirations are universal. We don't have to go out and gin up demand for them. We have to discover them through better questions, through more beautiful questions, through better conversations, better relationships, trustful relationships, and we think professionals are particularly poised to do this because they have those relationships, those trusting relationships with their customers.
I'm curious if you've got some favorite examples of companies in the transformation economy.
When you look at Fender Fender, I believe, is the world's largest guitar. Maybe it's the USA largest guitar manufacturer. And the CEO was interviewed, and he was asked, what's the challenge in selling a guitar? And he says, well, when people buy a guitar, they're very excited. They usually have lessons lined up, and they're really into it. They really want to learn. He says 90% of them or higher will quit within 3 to 6 months. And the guitar will go under the bed or in the closet. And he said, worse for us is they'll gift it to their cousin, and I'll lose another sale. He said, so in July 2017, they started Fender Play, a digital online platform, thousands of videos that could teach aspirants, is what we like to call them, people that aspire to some type of transformation, that would be able to teach them to play at the level that they desired. So beginner, intermediate, expert, probably even rock star, I'm not sure. And by 2020, he had 200,000 subscribers, I think paying $150 a year. And then 2020, COVID hit. And Fender made it public that they were going to give people a free trial. I think it was 3 months of Fender Play, because we were all locked in, right? So we were learning guitar or a foreign language or making bread or whatever. And he had 1 million people sign up within like a week. It crashed all of his servers and everything. And as of 2024, the latest numbers I could find, he's got 930,000 subscribers, paying him $150 a year, and his churn rate's 5%. Wow. And he sold more guitars in history year on year between 2020 and 2024 than he ever had. And his subscribers purchased 40% more from Fender than a non-subscriber. Just like we know Amazon Prime subscribers spend 8 times more or something like that. And he was asked in a follow-up interview, what did you learn from Fender Play? And he said that we're not selling guitars. We're selling musicianship. And I'll tell you, that changes the whole perspective. You're not selling a good or a service. Sure, it's part of the transformation. You need a guitar to play. But the real thing that people are paying for and will pay dearly for is the transformation. And now Fender hasn't capitalized on that. They kind of have a hybrid model. They're still selling the SKU guitars. I think they should just let people subscribe to their instruments and upgrade as they get better, if that's their aspiration, and get a better guitar, electric guitar, better amp, whatever. And I think that would be more powerful. It'd be more relational than transactional. But it's a great story about the focus comes off the product or the service and moves to the transformation.
My stepson loves building Legos. And I know he loves building them way more than he likes having them afterwards. And that's just very obvious. And he's saving up right now to build this Titanic. And this thing is longer than he is tall, I think.
Right.
We're going to move from these giant houses we live in Detroit to Chicago soon. So having a giant Titanic Lego in the house is going to be harder. And we found that there are actually subscription services for Lego. And this is really catering to folks who prefer the building process, which is what I think Lego is optimized for, versus the having and putting it in your showcase part of it, where you put everything back into a box and ship it back to them, and you get it's like a library for Lego.
That's cool.
And they create this subscription. Any other examples that you like the Fender one?
Well, I love the whole concierge doctor, direct primary care doctors like Dr. Paul. I think that they are pioneers. And that movement started in 1996. Wow. The first concierge doctor was a guy named Howard Moran, who was the Seattle Sonics basketball team doctor. And he said, when these guys get injured on the court, I can go out there and I can get them back in the game because I know everything about them. I know their family history. I know what they're allergic to. I know the drugs they take, blah, blah, blah. He says, why can't I do this in my medical practice? Because in my medical practice, I have 2,400 patients. And I'm on a fee-for-service model because of insurance and other regulations. And he said, and I can only spend 5-10 minutes with every patient because I have to see 50 or 60 a day. So he started MD Squared and said, I'm going to limit each doctor to 50 patients, period. And we're going to charge $24,000 a year for a married couple, $5,000 per kid. This was in 1996. And people told him, that'll never work. People won't pay for that. He had waiting lists, just like Dr. Paul does. And these guys are flourishing, these doctors that are doing this, because they're living their purpose. This is why they became doctors. They didn't become doctors to trade fee for service, to watch the clock, to have to answer to an insurance company for every medical decision that they make. They entered this profession to help people. That's their purpose. That's their meaning. That's what gives their life meaning. And when you look at Dr. Paul and compare him to a fee-for-service doctor, there's no comparison. And it's much better for the patient, because not only can he cure you when you present with an illness, he keeps you healthy. And that's kind of like the difference in selling guitars and musicianship, right? Keeping you healthy. That's an aspiration that we all have. And he can do that because he can spend more time with you.
I had only gotten familiar with this model through Dr. Paul, and he hadn't told me anything about the origins. I just kind of assumed that he might have been fed up with insurance and figured this was, a way to circumvent that. And then I like your version much better of, he was probably kind of more drawn to his original purpose of why he went through all of the pains of organic chemistry and med school and everything, to serve and heal people and not to be dealing with insurance. And that's what drew him to it. I'm curious if, since this is something I know you've studied a fair amount, if you've got any hunches on what this might drive the insurance industry in the healthcare space to do.
Oh, it's driving them crazy, because doctors like Dr. Paul, their patients are, they take less medication. So the drug companies aren't happy with the DPC movement. Insurance companies certainly aren't happy with it, because people are getting catastrophic policies, probably like something you have, higher deductible for the things that you truly can't afford. And Dr. Paul can take care of 80% probably of what you need, maybe more. And it's going to be a very long time, I think, for government policy to change to allow more of these DPC doctors. But there's actually been some bills passed that allow you to spend through your HSA accounts, your health savings accounts, on a DPC doctor now. That's a big change. Now, there's a bunch of state regulations on these poor docs, and, they have to fight that. But these doctors are flourishing, and they're going to change the way healthcare is delivered in this country. And it's going to be much better and far more impactful.
And on the topic of purpose, I was also very delighted to be reading what I thought was an accounting book and have it touch on purpose. And this is something that I know you work with a number of your firms on. On the flip side, I think, like the term transformation, it's something that marketing will tell your HR team that if you use the word purpose so many times on your careers website, you're going to get way more millennial and Gen Z applicants. So what's your kind of brass tacks test when you start working with a new organization that says they're purpose driven, in terms of how do you quickly suss out whether that's authentic or whether that's marketing?
Yeah, you could usually spot that pretty quick, because it's usually pretty easy to get a grasp on the culture of any type of business. As you know, when you go into a company or a firm, especially a professional firm, if people say my client, for instance, that's a key giveaway that it's just a bunch of silos, right? It's like a dorm room. They're sharing overhead, but they each have their own little practice. And I don't think there's a contradiction between profit and purpose. They're both important, but purpose definitely comes first. I mean, profit is an applause for a job well done, but it's not the performance. Purpose is the performance. Profit's the applause. Profit's a result. And, I believe the raison d'etre of business is to enhance human flourishing. And because businesses are a serious moral undertaking, I don't think this is explored much in business. Our vocabulary in business is very limited when you think about it. Talk to a philosopher or an anthropologist and you'll see what I mean. But business is a serious moral undertaking. I mean, if you think about the virtues that business people are taught, just by dint of doing the job, They're taught prudence. They're taught respect for others, serving other people first, paying attention to others' feelings and reactions more than, being outward directed, altruistic, if I may, which means outer directed. You're focused on the customer. This is the big difference between an artist and an entrepreneur, right? The artist is showing you or telling you in a story or a poem how they see the world, but an entrepreneur has to care about how you feel. They're outer directed. They're not inner directed. Not that artists are bad. They're great, but I'm just saying the roles are different. And I believe the truth of prosperity is give and you will be given unto. And that's not just scripture. That's strategy. You've got to put the customer first, because no customer walks into a store to please the owner. They're there for their own desires and their own purposes, and we have to constantly cater to them. And I think that can fit very well with profit. But if companies that put profit first above all else usually have very little profit. They usually don't last long, because this isn't a game that you can play for short-term benefit. You're in this for the long run. My favorite line on this is from Edwin Land, the co-founder of Polaroid. He literally said, the only thing that matters is the bottom line. He said, what a presumptuous thing to say. The bottom line's in heaven. Now, I don't care what your religious beliefs are, but that's a profound statement. We're here to do something. And as a creator, as a business, as an act of creation, and profit is the result. It's not the purpose.
In the early days when we started our firm, some might have argued that we had no business starting a second kind of entity or organization, which was more of a not-for-profit called Integrate Detroit. And we had, two things. One, we had a talent challenge in the 2017, 2018 timeframe around hiring really good engineers in this region. And secondly, if you walked around the city of Detroit, a city that's, 75, 80% Black, and then you went into any of the corporate offices, that ratio is almost flipped. And so between kind of the gender representation and the race representation felt like something we could make a difference around, while also kind of helping ourselves with identifying an alternate talent pipeline than the traditional one. In our case, unlike accounting, we also didn't have to hire anyone with a 4-year degree or certifications. Our interview process and signing off on their work was sufficient, right? And a couple of years into growing kind of both firms, I unfortunately listened to some, now in retrospect, bad advice where they said, hey, you know what? You're spreading yourself too thin doing this Integrated Detroit thing as well. And we were investing well over 6 figures that, we didn't have a ton of profit at the time into the second program, as well as, a lot of our focus and energy. And they said, hey, you know what? You need to scale a little bit more before you can do this, so that you have more time and energy. And in retrospect, it's very obvious that this work that we did in helping folks in Detroit with making like double, triple what they were making today by acting as a finishing school and we hired a ton of them. And then, other folks were able to hire them too. It gave us energy, not took away from it. And then we also, in retrospect, we met folks that were mentors that came to work for us as kind of our more senior consultants. We met customers that came in and did talks with the students. And it was kind of clear. And I'm curious, if you were talking to a CEO today who was considering this or not yet taking action, what kind of advice you might have for them about, doing those things that seem like distractions, if they're aligned with purpose, because it's going to be better in the long run.
Was Integrate Detroit, was that a not-for-profit that you established?
Yeah, we basically didn't, compared to the other boot camps and stuff in Detroit that charged the high fees, we didn't charge our students any fees. We just took margin from our day jobs, if you will, to fund the teachers and everything else needed. There were some volunteers and, opportunity cost of billable hours from our consultants that came in and did mentorship and other things. And so it wasn't registered as a not-for-profit. It was more of a DBA. And that's mostly because we didn't looking at all the additional overhead that came with doing the 501c3 just felt like that would be now too much of a distraction. We said, hey, we're not going to get the tax benefits, but let's just get the benefits for now, and then we'll deal with that stuff later. So in a manner of speaking, like it was a net negative on our day jobs profit, but I'd say overall it was clearly a net positive in terms of certainly how energized everyone was and how much purpose and meaning we felt was reinforced.
Sure.
And then probably also had like a long-term impact on our profitability as well.
There's not much difference between that and a professional firm doing pro bono work, right? I mean, even Dr. Paul and other DPC docs do pro bono work for like 10% of their patients or something, I believe, on average. Peter Drucker, at the end of his life, for the last half of his career, was really interested in what the not-for-profit sector could teach the business world, and vice versa. There's a lot of principles that go together, but Drucker thought the biggest thing for not-for-profits was you can pay people peanuts, and as long as they have a higher calling, as long as they believe they're contributing to something greater than themselves, they'll accept it, and they'll work just as diligently as somebody making, millions of dollars in a hedge fund. So I think there's lessons for not-for-profits that we can learn, and I think it's really cool when a business does something like that. That gives your people purpose and meaning and doesn't necessarily contribute to the bottom line and may even in the short term detract from it.
And I'm curious, any particular stories that you find inspiring about folks who made the shift, and also where you might go point us to learn more about getting the confidence and everything else we need to take the leap to change things?
One of my favorite stories is with a law firm that we helped that actually had a consulting and lobbying arm. A lot of law firms have lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and this firm was no different. But the lobbyists were pricing by the hour. And the partner who headed up that, as his legacy, he was thinking about his legacy. He said, I'm going to move this lobbying firm away from the billable hour. And he brought us in, and we helped him go through that transition. And of course, they were lawyers, so they had a lot of questions. And how are we going to do this? And how are we going to measure people's effectiveness? And blah, blah, blah. Even though lobbying firms that aren't attached to a law firm, they don't bill by the hour. But this one did because it was attached to a law firm, and that was the predominant model. And we helped them change. And he took a lot of heat. And he had to constantly defend himself with the partner group. Why are you doing this? This is an insane move. And he was able to plow through it and do it because he was thinking about his legacy and his successor, like any good leader should, right? Leadership is really all about succession, if you think about it, because you're not going to be there forever. And that was just a really inspiring story. And of course, it motivated the people. It was easier for him to attract talent. In this world, that means good lobbyists, people with a lot of connections, big Rolodex, if you will. And that was just a really inspiring story because he went against the grain of the firm. And that took guts, and it took courage, and it took commitment. And I don't see enough of that in business today. We seem to be playing small ball in a lot of areas rather than big, bold visions like Elon Musk has, change the automobile industry or something like that. I'm not saying it's not out there. There are companies doing amazing things with AI and other things, but in the circles I run around with professional firms, they're talking about increasing efficiency by 10% or realization by 5%. Who cares? It'd be like Martin Luther King on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial saying, "I have quarterly objectives." Right? I mean, that's not going to inspire anybody. Give people a vision that they can. We're going to go to the moon within a decade.
And I'm curious in that case with the lobbying firm, they moved away from hourly billing into something more fixed price on a time basis or outcome based. Like, what did they move towards? I'm not entirely familiar with the lobbying space myself as well.
Yeah, nor was I, by the way, when we entered this engagement. Even though it was a law firm, we were intimately familiar with that structure. But they predominantly moved to a fixed price model. But I bet now they're probably more on a subscription because they have very big clients who engage them constantly to fight a bill, to promote a bill, whatever it might be. And just like your blog story that you had sent me before the show, which was fantastic, by the way, great example of what you did there with that company. It's the same thing in the lobbying world. Somebody can pick up the phone and get you into that senator or that congressman. How do you value that? It doesn't take any time. What do I put on my timesheet? But it gets that connection, it gets the process rolling for their customer. It could possibly mean millions of dollars in terms of a tax code change or whatever they're lobbying for or against. Could be billions of dollars. And somebody can just pick up the phone and make the connection and get the appointment. That's big. So they're probably more on a subscription these days, I would think.
You have in your book just leveled up so clearly is that customers have profit. And we don't necessarily talk about that enough. So for the audience sake, can you explain kind of the notion first, and then we want to dig deeper into it?
Yeah, no, this is a great one. I'm so glad you brought this up. The thing about any transaction is both the customer and the seller, they both profit. They both walk away thinking that they're better off because they made the transaction. And we know this because we have that double thank you moment. When the Starbucks barista hands you the coffee and you give her your $5, you both say thank you. If it was a one-sided transaction, somebody would say you're welcome, right? Like getting a gift. But it's not. We both say thank you because we both walk away a winner, or at least we expect to. And the thing is about accounting and even our GDP statistics that we measure, at the macro level, they don't account for the customer profit. So when I go into Starbucks and pay $5 for a latte, I only bought it because it was worth more to me than the $5. But we get all hung up. Well, how much more? Well, it could be $6 or it could be $20 because I'm hung over from last night doing tequila shots at the bar. Right. and I need my caffeine shot to make it through this course or whatever. And so value is completely subjective and we can't measure it. It's like the dark matter of the universe. Physicists know it's out there, but we don't have good mechanisms yet to measure it. Value is the same way. It doesn't show up in any of our accounting. The customer's profit doesn't. So we only record things at a price that was agreed upon. In arrears, we record them. That's what generally accepted accounting principles do. It's silent with respect to value. But the way I love to illustrate this is how much, and the serious question we ask audiences all around the world, it blows people away, this question. How much would I have to pay you, in all honesty and good faith, how much would I have to pay you to never use your iPhone again? Ever. That number is a retirement number for most people. And I mean a healthy retirement. Because that's the value that Apple's added to the world. And it's not measured. It's not in our GDP. So that customer profit, what economists call consumer surplus, by the way, I call it customer profit because I think that's more clear. But it's not measured. It's not captured anywhere. And yet every transaction is just a way for buyer and seller to divide up value.
And, this transaction goes a lot smoother when the customer is aware of a sense of profit gain that they get out of a transaction. And not all customers are quite as problem aware, let alone value or profit aware. And something that I've been toying with a lot more in this next iteration of what we're doing is taking the chops that we had from strategy consulting and management consulting combined with technology development and awareness of what technology can and cannot do, and bringing this all together. And previously it was, more of a fee for service model. And now I'm curious about the folks that I can see where the profit can be, that the customer is not yet convinced and willing to take on some risk on the customer's behalf, where we can both win. And I'm clearly asking you for some free consulting here, or maybe even a therapy session. I don't know. So, what's your advice on kind of approaching this here? Because I think AI is going to just unlock so much more profit opportunities for customers, and is going to take the market surprisingly long. It shouldn't be surprising when we've seen the adoption curves with previous technology, but when we're sitting in it today and we can see that it works. But it takes us so long to convince others to try it. I'm thinking about ways to leapfrog that conversation and put some more capital and take on some more risk. So, what's the therapy or the advice that you have there?
Yeah, I thought this was a great question that you asked. What happens when we can see the profit potential for the customer better than they can? That is really challenging, and that's where outcome-based pricing. I mean, it's the holy grail. It's what AI companies are trying to get to, rather than paying per seat or per output or whatever. How does this impact your outcomes? And we can charge based on that. I think Peter Thiel at Pantalear does this. That company is known for its outcome-based pricing. I don't think it does it across the board, but I think it does it in very specific examples, like your blog article was a very, very great example of more of an outcome-based price where you're taking some of the risk. I mean, you took risk with the R&D, right, that you developed to produce that tool. And this is the holy grail. And we're not there yet, at least in the professional space, we're not there, because professionals love to say we can't guarantee outcomes. If I'm your CPA, I can't guarantee I'm going to win against the IRS. A lawyer can't guarantee that you're going to win a lawsuit. But what they can do is, if they are doing things that they have more certainty about, they should be willing to throw some skin in the game and do outcome-based pricing. And so one of the ways that we explain this, this is in my book, Time's Up, but is to use a tip clause. And where you go into a company and you say, okay, you want this desired outcome. Maybe there's a certain timeline they want it within a week or 2 months or whatever. And you say, we'll do whatever it takes to get there. And once we're done, pay us what you think it's worth. Now that sounds crazy to most people, because they think, people, they throw $100 at you or something. But people are pretty generous if they see value. They're willing to pay for value. And some of our best examples of firms moving to outcome-based pricing is using this tip clause. Now, usually it does require a relationship with the customer that is greater than, say, 1 year or 2 years. But if you have that type of relationship, a tip clause can be an excellent thing. I'll give you a quick story. A CPA I know helped a company, his biggest customer, sell their business. And involved in that was, working with the lawyers, doing due diligence, being involved in the negotiation, of course, doing the tax planning to keep as much of his wealth as he could, the business owners. And this guy brought about $15 million of value to the table. And I asked him, I said, if you would have had a tip clause that basically told the customer, look, I'm going to do whatever it takes to effectuate this sale, and when we're done, pay what you think it's worth. I said, what do you think the guy would have paid you? And he thought about it for a couple minutes. He went silent. He said, probably $500,000. Now, on a $15 million savings, that's probably low, but I'll take his number. He knows the client better than I do. This was like a 20-year client. And I said, what did you end up charging? And he said $38,000.
Yeah.
And that was at their highest consulting rate. So he left $462,000 on the table just by not being willing to take the risk of putting the decision onto the client about how much do you think this is worth. Pay what you think it's worth.
Yeah. You mentioned my blog post a couple of times, and there's an episode that we put out recently that we'll make sure to have linked. That's the audio version of it. And the short of it is that we were contacted by a logistics company that had a very tight deadline and a little bit of a contract ambiguity problem with their client, and they needed to get the diameter of copper cables in a short amount of time, and it was going to cost them over $200,000 in overtime with guys going around measuring them with micrometers or calipers.
Wow.
Being a super easy solution for AI and vision, instead of guys walking around and measuring this and writing stuff down and all of the additional risk associated with manual data entry, we had them take photos and stick an index card onto each of these palettes, and we counted the number of pixels of the index card. We counted the number of pixels, and we were able to create a custom model, and it took us 3 days. I was surprised myself. This is something new we're doing, and if we build out for 3 days, it wouldn't have been a lot of revenue compared to what it turned out to be. And really, I sat with their CIO, and he was really excited that I didn't want any money up front. He was a little worried that we were moving so fast we didn't even get to sign NDAs and stuff. But once we got that all kind of cleared up, that was along the lines of what I said of like, hey, how about you pay me like, in this case, I was somewhere between 30 and 40% of the money I save you. And if I don't save you anything, then this is all going to risk. And this has led to them being able to go back to their customer instead of it being an arduous contract arbitration, which is never good for a relationship.
Right.
They're able to go back to the customer and say, hey, we both forgot to add this in the contract, and it's not obvious who is on the hook for this. The good news is we can do it for a fraction of the cost than it would cost what you think it would cost.
Wow.
And so we don't know where that's going yet as of recording date, but it could create kind of, I will, if that goes through, we'll upgrade what we've built using kind of 3 days of vibe coding on a workflow automation platform called N8N into something that is a little bit more robust, reliable. I don't have to stand over and watch it, but it's going to cost way less. I'll probably recoup the cost of development between 1 to 2 months compared to the value that's on the table. Now, I don't know how I would do this if I had a team of 55 like I had before. Mm-hmm. This is easy because I blocked off and canceled a bunch of my appointments for a few days to get this done. If I had 50 folks that we had before that we needed to make sure we're billable and everything else, I'm curious about how you think this transition looks like for a little bit of more of a scaled firm.
You had 2 points in the article that I loved. One, you kept the IP on that product that you developed, which I think is brilliant. You're kind of doing what FedEx did. The reason airlines got better with luggage is because FedEx sold them their tracking system.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
That they had developed. So you keeping the IP, that's really, really smart. And the second thing you said somewhere in that blog post was, you got to think about rebuilding your business from the ground up. I think the reason you were able to do this is because you spun out of the legacy entity that had, 200 people on the team that you had to constantly feed the beast with overhead and keep them billable and all of that. And it made you more nimble. I totally agree with your point. It was in one of your questions about how jobs are going to there's going to be more solos. Like you were able to reschedule everything and work on this for 3 days concentration. I think you're going to see a lot more of that. I mean, I view AI as a tool, and it's just going to help us. I view it as augmented intelligence. Mm-hmm. It's helping us be more productive. It's like any other tool, like the tractor or fire, electricity, you name it, the washing machine. I have future glee about it. I'm amazed that we can do stuff like this. So yeah, I think it's a great story. That's a hard one to top, your blog post.
Yeah. And then, we touched on this a bit because I am curious where the labor market changed a lot with cloud, right? Like startups were able to emerge that didn't need a ton of capital to go buy a bunch of servers and stuff without knowing how much they'd have to buy for. It used to feel like renting office space as a professional services firm where you sign a 7-year lease, but you have no idea how much you're going to grow. And a lot of your capital is locked up in the stuff that is an underutilized asset or sometimes overutilized, like the thing you mentioned with Fender where their servers all came down. It should happen less now because AWS and Google Cloud and everybody else allows you to spin up additional capacity in an automated fashion as you start to see the thresholds get there. And then I think in the AI case, you switch from like the capital constraint that cloud removed to this capability constraint where previously I would have to have hired a number of folks to pull this all together, maybe a business analyst, a product manager, software engineer, quality assurance kind of person. And I had agents working on the agents doing a bunch of these things. And so that's kind of my personal anecdote. And I'm curious from a zoomed out perspective, where you see the professional services firm going.
Yeah, this is a great thing. I think we make a category mistake when we think about the economy in terms of jobs. Jobs are a cost to a business. Businesses don't exist to employ people. I promise you, if Toyota could make the same amount of cars with one employee, they'd do it in a heartbeat, and we'd be richer for it. Because the total number of employees that they employ could go do something else. And I do not fear at all, and I think it's overblown and hyped that AI, if you listen to some of these presidents like of Anthropic, I forget the gentleman's name, who's the CEO, founder of Anthropic, but I listen to him and he's got this doom and gloom scenario. Bill Gates does, even Elon Musk does. And I'm thinking to myself, there's a reason in Hebrew why the word for work and worship is the same. It's avodah, I believe, is the Hebrew word for work and worship. It means the same thing. We will always, as human beings, find ways to serve each other. And we shouldn't measure a sector based on the number of people it employs. Look at agriculture. We're less than 2% of jobs are in agriculture, and yet this country feeds the world. Manufacturing, jobs have declined since the 50s, and yet our manufacturing sector is bigger than South Korea and Japan and Germany combined. This idea that we don't manufacture anything, it's a $2 trillion sector. It's enormous, and we do it with fewer people. So I'm not worried about jobs. Jobs are going to take care of themselves. We'll find a way to do more things. That's why I agree with your point about there's going to be more solopreneurs in the future. I think that's a great thing.
And, in your book, you also lay out that there's 3 types of capital, human capital, structural capital, and I think social capital. And I'd love for you to kind of give us the short version of that to tie up the future of the firm.
Yeah, human capital is the most important of those 3 categories that you mentioned: human, social, and structural. Human capital is your people, and they're not assets. I hate the term. People are our biggest asset. They're not you don't own a person. I think the 13th Amendment kind of outlawed that a long time ago. And people they invest their intellectual capital inside your firm. The person who coined the term knowledge worker and knowledge economy was Peter Drucker. And some other obscure economists, they kind of coined it at the same time. But the point is, human capital is 80% of the world's wealth, the stuff in between our ears. It's not in resources. It's not in oil. It's not in land. It's not in real estate and buildings. It's not in any of that stuff. It's the knowledge in our head. The caveman, back in his day, had all the same resources that we do today. And yet our standard of living is immeasurably better than his, because he didn't have the knowledge to bring to bear on the tree that could make a drug or oil or a combustion engine, whatever. I mean, not wealth is knowledge. And wealth and knowledge is always in humans. Now, you could say AI's got knowledge, but it can't develop new knowledge. Creativity, innovation, that's a human endeavor. And that's always going to take us by surprise. If we could plan innovation, we wouldn't need it, and socialism would work. We could plan the economy. AI could run the economy, could figure out prices, do everything that the old USSR dreamed of doing, but it can't do it because innovation is a creative act, and only humans can create. I mean, if an AI bot surprises us, it's malfunctioning. But innovation always surprises us. Think about the iPhone. Think about any great innovation, Google, AI, whatever. It's always like, wow, it just grabs your throat and shakes you and says, this is something new, and it creates our future. So I am not worried about any of this stuff. And that's human capital. Human capital goes home at night. And as Peter Drucker said, knowledge workers are volunteers at the end of the day. Whether or not they come back, it's totally up to them. It's volitional. And that's human capital. Structural capital is everything inside the firm after the humans go home. So your processes, your tools, your computers, all the stuff that your marketing plan, your HR policy, your strategy, and all of that, that's all structural capital. In the knowledge economy, that's about the only thing a company owns is its structural capital. It doesn't own the humans, and it doesn't own the third category, which is social capital, which is your customers and your vendors and your associations that you belong to, the people that you do business with. All of those things are social capital. You don't own the human capital and you don't own the social capital. And that's why the stock market, that's why accounting can only explain about 15% of the market capitalization of a business.
Ron, thank you so much for making time. A few things that we like to ask all of our guests. A lot of the audience comes here to think about how to engage their teams better, to ultimately build more delightful output for the market, more delightful products. So in terms of teams and culture, I'm curious if you've got kind of a North Star that you look to as you engage your own teams.
Wow. I'm kind of a Disney file, and I think Disney has an amazing culture. Just because of the way Walt founded it, he changed the language. This is not an amusement park. It's a theme park. We don't have rides. We have attractions and adventures. We don't have staff. We have cast members. They're on a stage. They're off stage, on stage, backstage. We have guests, not customers. All of those cultural changes, those language changes are still applicable to this day in Disney's around the world. And that's a culture that's always blown my mind because I guess I'm biased. I went through Disney University and I took a 3.5-day course, and it was the best education I've ever had in my life.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I'll double down for you that anytime we were reviewing a resume and we saw that they were a Disney Imagineer, that was one way to quickly get to the top of the list. And sometimes we would even skip, like I would skip and do the screening myself instead of the recruiter or head of HR or whoever. And yeah, another coined term as well.
That says a lot. That says a lot. And my other, I've always admired Porsche, because the Porsche CEOs are very fond of saying, if two Porsches exist on the same block, that's a tragedy.
Now, explain that a little bit.
The
first one's maybe very differentiating, or
because Porsche doesn't give a crap about market share. They want to build the world's finest automobile, and that's what their purpose is. And they're not out to sell millions and millions and millions. And therefore, if there's two on the same street, that's a tragedy. I love that line because it puts the focus on innovation and creativity and not just big for the sake of big. Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell, not a profitable, sustainable business.
Yeah, and I wonder, being part of the VW group, how often that gets challenged, and how much they need to push back to the mothership.
Yep.
I also recall that in terms of kind of building a more affordable Porsche, I think there was a famous quote that they said, yeah, people who can't afford a brand new Porsche that we offer can always buy a used Porsche, versus us diluting our value and building something more for scale.
Right.
And unrelated note, I'm curious if there's a product or service that you just found totally delightful recently when you unboxed it or you got to experience it.
So I just bought a bunch of new Apple stuff. And of course, their packaging is it's masterful, that whole experience. I'm a big fan of Nobu, the restaurant Nobu.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Unbelievable experience to go to a Nobu. It's outrageously expensive, but it's an amazing, and they only bring out one dish at a time. They're very, very deliberate. The presentation's beautiful. Just everything about the Nobu experience is amazing to me. And I believe car companies do a crappy job here. Like Lexus could make the experience of buying a car. I mean, let's face it, it's your second biggest purchase probably outside of your house. And they just, especially if you pre-order it, and customize it, they should have shots of the factory. They should have shots of your car being built. You should know when it's on the the ship coming over. And they don't do any of that. It just shows up. You get a call from the dealer, and it's no big deal. They should that should be an experience in and of itself, and it's not. And I think that's a waste.
I'm so glad that you said that. Having spent a lot of time in the automotive industry, I tend to know for a fact that when the employees at the auto companies order kind of their management lease vehicle, especially if they're ordering something new and cool that's very exciting, they will oftentimes go into the back-end systems and look at kind of the VIN or the CSN or whatever for their car that's been assigned to them to see how far along it is. And I'd get to hear from this when I'm having lunch from them and stuff saying, yeah, my Bronco is on a truck on its way here. And so the system exists already. Now, mind you, a lot of it's behind a very legacy mainframe that it's hard to integrate, but hard is not enough of an excuse, I think, if you're wanting to really drive delight. And so I've felt this myself. And I think the other challenge with that industry, I think, is that, a lot of the companies are stuck between the dealerships groups and the unions. Yep. And these made a ton of sense at certain time. And when you compare to someone like Tesla, where they've integrated Grok AI into their UI now, and when you're driving, you can ask in a question of something like, hey, I want to get a Starbucks and charge. Find me the best Starbucks and supercharger within my range where I'm the minimum amount of detour required. And it'll go run the numbers and it'll find you an answer just as good. And something so simple that's already integrated in this big captive screen that everyone has falls apart when you have 6 or 7 players that have to hook up together and all handshake on it compared to kind of owning the full stack.
I did hear, by the way, from one of my friends owns a Mini Cooper, and he said that they keep you informed as the car's being built. It's on the ship. It's on the truck to your dealer. They kind of, I can track my Domino's pizza for crying out loud.
I got some bad news for you about that.
Okay.
I haven't, it's pretty popular debunking that's happened on the internet in the last few years that the Domino's pizza app tracker is just a pre-timer.
Okay.
It's fake.
Yep. Okay.
So I'm sorry to tell you the Santa Claus doesn't exist on that one.
Okay.
But, it created the same amount of delight because if the pizza shows up on time, what does it matter whether it was not in the oven when they said it was, right?
Well, the GPS tracking on it's right.
That one is for sure, yeah.
Right, yeah. This is back to innovation. This was the thing about Uber that really grabbed me. Uber was a psychological innovation. It was, sure, it required GPS and the iPhone to be able to do it. But what was really cool about Uber is you know exactly when the car was going to show up. So if you're inside the bar, it's raining outside, you don't have to walk outside every 3 minutes. Is the taxi here yet? You know exactly when he pulled up, and you could time it just right to walk out and get right in. Didn't have to take out your wallet and fumble with money and tips and all of that. It was an incredible psychological innovation.
Yeah, certainly. And hey, what is the best way that you like folks to get a hold of you, your team at Threshold, find your books?
Books are all on Amazon, so I've got an author page up there. You can see all 7 of the books. Again, the first one's out of print. People can find me on LinkedIn. I'm one of the influencers on LinkedIn, and I've got a bunch of articles up there, including, by the way, Earning My Mouse Ears, which was a 3-part series I wrote after attending the Disney University in Orlando. Oh, cool. I can get those links to you and you can put them in the show note. I'm on X at Ronald Baker. And if you want to email me, I'm happy to talk to folks. I'm Ron at thresholdnow.com.
Awesome. Well, Ron, Thank you so much for making time for us. Thank you so much for everything that you do with putting your wisdom out there for everyone and inspiring all of us. I appreciate you making time for us.
Thank you, Ashok. This has been great. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Before we wrap up, there's a few things that I have taken away as reflections from this conversation that I want to share with you. And the first one may or may not annoy you if you're a lawyer listening, but I think it's going to resonate with everyone else who's had to hire a lawyer. Even in a good day during a business, you've got a lot of legal fees. And if your lawyer is charging you purely on an hourly basis and they're not using AI to meaningfully reduce the time it takes to do their work, there is a high chance that you're overpaying for your legal fees. Now, AI is not perfect in this field yet, and there have been some famous mistakes. But at this point, it's hard to argue that it should not be dramatically reducing the amount of time required to research, draft, analyze. Even if AI is not doing the work for them, it should be compressing the effort behind the scenes, and that savings has to be passed on to you. Or I would recommend, like Ron would, to work with a company that's transformed themselves. The second thing here that I loved how he described is customer profit. When we think about value, it comes down to usually three things that we can help a customer with. We can help their growth and growing their revenue. We can help them reduce costs and improve the margin. And the third one that sometimes is overlooked is reducing uncertainty, where if you can help your customer with driving more predictability and driving out a lot of the unpredictability of their business, there's a lot that they can churn into more profit or more growth, whichever makes more sense there. The third one that I really love is about transformation. And it's a no-nonsense way to think about whether you're actually in the transformation space or not, and whether if you're using a service provider that calls themselves AI transformation or digital transformation, what that actually is. What does the customer look like before working with you, and what does the world look like for them after? In this new venture that we're working on, a lot of what we're exploring is how to help companies identify those before and after transformations for their customers, and then work back from that to design the technology, their operating model, the economics, their go-to-market around that transformation. Another thing that Ron's story reminded me is something that we learned from lean product development. If you're looking to change your business model, this doesn't have to be a scary overnight switch. Now, some of you may have the risk tolerance for that. Most of us don't. And for those of you who don't, you could just start with the customers who are probably already begging for it, the ones who feel the pain most clearly. In Ron's case, that first conversation happened, as he mentioned, on the 19th hole of a golf course with a client who already didn't really like the way that Ron was charging him. So he welcomed it. So I would start with those people as you're noodling with new ways that you can harness these latest technologies and help share that new value with your customers. If this conversation got you thinking about your own business model, your pricing, or how AI might reshape the economics of your company, we are experimenting with this every day for ourselves as well as our customers. And you can find out a little bit more customized to you during our office hours. Send us a note at officehours@convergence.fm, and we'll schedule 30 to 60 minutes, whatever works for you. And it'll be myself, someone from the team that gets on, and we can talk through things like where AI might unlock value in your business, how to think about pricing and outcomes instead of input activity, or how to identify the customers who might be ready for a different model so you can get started on your new tomorrow. So if this episode sparks some ideas, reach out to us. It's officehours@convergence.fm. We'll get back to you and do some scheduling. With that, thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.